What a great morning. I was just reflecting during lunch that this is, I think, the 13th or 14th community conference that we've put on. It's kind of hard to believe. I've actually lost count now. And the faculty presentations this morning were just so spectacular. I think this really sets the bar. It's really the high watermark for our community conferences. And really want to just take a moment again to thank all the faculty and for their wonderful presentations and for the really terrific expert answers session. So I think just to reflect and quickly summarize what we heard this morning, as Dr. DeMonte mentioned, the field has come a long way in the last 10 years. A lot of progress has been made, but there's still a lot of important unanswered questions, and there's still a lot of progress to be made. Even though surgery has improved, radiation has improved, there is, unfortunately, a fraction of patients for whom those modalities are not sufficient and who go on to need systemic therapies or drugs to treat the disease. And unfortunately, that is still really lacking. And that's really a problem that we at the foundation have set out to try to change over the last 10 years. So I wanted to kind of reflect upon where we've come in terms of trying to solve that problem. But before I do that, I know that there was a lot to absorb and a lot to take in this morning, and I just wanted to mention a couple things in case anyone had any lingering questions. All of the presentations from this morning are going to be recorded and up on YouTube and up on the website within the next couple weeks. So we'll send out an announcement about that. If you want to go back and rewatch something, or if you didn't get all your questions answered, they'll be available. In addition to that, I wanted to mention that there's a very valuable resource that is outside on the registration table. This is what we call the Expert Recommendations for the Diagnosis and Treatment of Chordoma. It is a manual that we've created based on consensus guidelines that have been developed for the best practice management of chordoma. Dr. Patel, who moderated the Ask the Expert session, was involved in the effort to create those consensus guidelines. And what we've done is essentially distilled the medical terminology and all the medical concepts into language that's understandable, that's straightforward, that's easy to digest. And so if there are still questions about how chordoma is treated, this is a really valuable resource, and I encourage everyone to pick up a copy. The other thing I wanted to mention is that for those who want to dive even deeper into the medical nuances, there is, if you can believe it, actually a textbook on chordoma. A disease as rare as chordoma, one might expect there not to be a textbook, but indeed there is. In fact, the first chordoma textbook was written about 15 years ago. It was edited by a team of physicians from across the world led by Dr. Griff Harsh at Stanford. And in that 15-year period, so much has happened that much of what was in that initial textbook is now outdated. And so Dr. Harsh and his colleague, Dr. Vaz, who's actually with us here today. Dr. Vaz was at Stanford until recently and now has just recently joined the faculty at Baylor, set about to try to update this definitive textbook on chordoma. It was really a massive undertaking. It was a multi-year effort involving 40 or more authors across the world. But they've pulled it together and it's just been published. It is an absolute treasure trove. So clearly very technical, but for those in the room who might be interested in diving a layer deeper and really understanding the kind of technical nuances of how chordoma is managed, this is potentially a valuable resource. It's available online if you go to our website, and there's a discount for those who purchase the book, and there's a referral code on the Chordoma Foundation's website. So, and certainly if anyone has questions, Dr. Vaz is kind enough to join us and is, I'm sure, happy to answer any questions. So this conversation is really about two things. First of all, kind of reflecting upon where we've been and where we're going, and recognizing that all the progress that's been made is really a function of a team effort of doctors, researchers, patients, family members coming together with the belief that chordoma is a solvable problem and that together we can really make an impact and create a better future for those of us who are affected by this disease. That is the belief that is motivated and animated everything we've done at the foundation since the very beginning. And I think to understand where we are and where we're going, it's sometimes helpful to understand where we've come from. Some of you who I've known for a while and have been coming to these conferences for years are familiar with the story, but for others who are more recently diagnosed or newer to the community, I thought I'd take just a moment to reflect upon where we've come and how this all got started. So as some of you may know, I am, as I mentioned, a survivor of chordoma myself. I was diagnosed at the age of 18. I was an undergrad at Duke studying engineering when I came down with really severe headaches. And to make a long story short, those headaches turned out not to be a good thing because they led to the discovery of a tumor in the center of my head, which turned out to be a skull-based chordoma. I was very fortunate to have a very good surgery and a complete resection. And knock on wood, since then have been tumor-free. It's now been 11 years, which is really kind of surreal and hard to believe. Thank you. But at the time when I was diagnosed, as I'm sure many of you experienced, you go to the internet or go to the literature and try to learn about chordoma. And at that time, there was so little out there. There was so little information about the disease. There was no place to turn for reliable information, for support, no way to connect with other patients. It was a really lonely and challenging journey to deal with the disease. But on top of that, reading the statistics, at the time the median survival was 7 years. If you looked at the survival curve, they kept going down. And so that was concerning and discouraging for me. And being 18 years old, I had so much that I was looking forward to. I really became determined not to accept those odds and wanted to do everything in my power to try to change them. And through a kind of a stroke of luck, you might say, I found out, actually, when I was recovering from surgery, I was scouring the literature, trying to learn everything I could about chordoma. One of the things that I learned was that, by coincidence, the only federally funded chordoma researcher in the entire country, of all places, happened to be right in my backyard at Duke, where I was an undergrad. And to make a long story short, I was kind of this eager student wanting to do anything I could to help. And I went and showed up at the investigator's name was Dr. Kelly. I went and showed up at his lab and said, look, I see you're studying chordoma. I've just been diagnosed. I'd really like to do something to help. Is there anything that could be done? And he said, well, glad you asked, because in fact, I'm looking for some more help in the lab. And so to make a long story short, I really had nothing, no reason to think that I could be helpful. I hadn't ever taken biology class. I didn't know the first thing about cancer. But I had a lot of motivation, and I wanted to help. So a couple weeks later, I show up in the lab, and here's me culturing chordoma cells. It was an absolute crash course in molecular biology and genetics and cancer biology. But I found the work to be so stimulating and inspiring, and it was such a cause for optimism. Seeing and hearing and learning about all the advances that had been made in other tumor types really gave me hope that progress was possible in chordoma. Unfortunately, that optimism was soon confronted by reality, which was that it was very, very difficult to study chordoma. For one, we didn't have access to the materials that we needed. We didn't have tumor tissue to study. We didn't have access to things called cell lines, which are tumor cells that grow in a petri dish and are needed for all sorts of experiments and drug testing, et cetera. We didn't have access to animal models. So all these things, all these experiments we wanted to do, all these technologies and approaches we wanted to apply to chordoma, we couldn't. Our hands were really tied. On top of that, we were working essentially in complete isolation. We didn't know anyone else that was studying chordoma. And we were one tiny lab with not a lot of resources. And so it quickly became clear over the course of about a year working in the lab that there was, one, a whole lot of potential, a lot of possibility. But in order to realize that potential, it was going to require a much larger effort beyond just what one lab could do. And it was going to require totally changing the landscape and creating the conditions to make it possible for other labs and companies to get involved and bring their expertise and resources to bear to focus on chordoma. And so In 2007, my mother and I, along with some other patients and family members that we had connected with on an online support group that was actually at that point hosted on MSN, got together and started the Chordoma Foundation with the vision of one day creating a future in which those of us who are affected by chordoma would be able to overcome the disease and maintain our quality of life. And to achieve that vision, we took on this two-pronged mission. One, to do everything in our power to improve the lives of individuals affected by the disease at every point throughout their journey with the disease, while also working to lead the search for a cure so that one day we could solve the problem for good. And I would be totally bluffing if I told you that we knew what we were doing. We very much came from humble beginnings. You know, there's the saying, a kitchen table operation. Well, we were very much a kitchen table operation. This is a picture from one of our first board meetings, literally around the kitchen table of one of our board members, Heather Lee, who some of you in the room may know. Sadly, Heather lost her son, Justin, to chordoma after a 7-year battle with the disease. But as time has gone on, this grassroots kitchen table operation has grown. It has become a global movement involving hundreds of doctors and researchers and thousands of patients and family members across the world. And we have picked up an incredible amount of momentum, and there is an extraordinary amount of progress that's being made that really makes the work tremendously stimulating and tremendously energizing, and I think has given me an increasing sense of optimism as time has gone on. So to take on this challenge, we set about to achieve 3 goals. First of all, better treatments that will ultimately lead to a cure. But it's not just about better treatments. You have to be able to use those treatments appropriately. You have to patients have to be cared for appropriately such that those treatments can actually be most beneficial. So it's about providing better care. And then finally, to improve and create a better experience for all of us throughout the journey with the disease. And over the last decade, as the foundation has evolved, we initially started off focusing primarily on research. We had limited resources, but as time has gone on, we've expanded to focus on trying to work to improve healthcare and the standard of care for chordoma patients. And in the last 3 years, to really do a lot more to serve and meet the needs of those of us who are going through the disease throughout our journey. So where have we come in the last 10 years? We've gone from having just a handful of researchers studying chordoma and no companies involved, and really chordoma research being in its infancy and starting from square one, if you will, to now having a very vibrant research community of over 300 researchers across the globe, all over the United States, in Europe, Italy, Germany, Austria. There's a growing group of researchers and a great deal of activity in China now. And we've had 5 international research workshops now where 300 researchers have come together. Many of the faculty in the room have come to those conferences, and it's just an incredible opportunity to exchange the latest research findings, to exchange ideas, to form partnerships and collaborations. And so it's, as a patient and having started off working in the lab in complete isolation, seeing the way that this field has coalesced and the energy that exists in the field is really extraordinarily exciting to me. We've formed a very strong medical and scientific advisory board and have benefited greatly from their dedication and expertise. They have helped guide and steer our research strategy. I won't go into this in great detail, but if anyone is interested, I'm happy to talk more at one of the breaks, or you can go to our website or look at our annual report to learn more about our research strategy. But I think the key take-home message is that unlike kind of traditional nonprofits or disease foundations, which exist primarily to raise money and give it away to research, that's very important, and we do that as well. But we take a slightly different approach, which is that rather than just being reactive and waiting for researchers to come along with a bright idea, we try to harness the wisdom of this this research community that has evolved and be very proactive about driving forward projects to address the most important priorities that are identified by that field to make sure that research continues to move forward as efficiently and as rapidly as possible. And so we have a kind of a 5-part research roadmap that really spans the entire therapeutic development continuum, all the way from most basic research through clinical research. And I'm excited to say that over the last 10 years, we've really overcome many of the barriers that are standing in the way of progress across each of these stages of research. So we think of it as kind of a research enabling infrastructure. We've kind of created the electricity grid and the highways and the power substations and the water treatment plants that underlie the research that is needed across that entire continuum. Those are things like a biobank to collect and distribute tumor samples, model repositories of cell lines and animal models, a drug screening pipeline, a clinical trials program, et cetera. So the idea is that we make research as efficient and rapid at every step of this process as possible. So where has that led us? It has resulted in the last 10 years in the discovery of about over 20 therapeutic targets. So these are 20 features of the biology of the tumor that could be targeted with a drug, with a novel therapy. Some of those targets are what we'd call repurposing candidates. In other words, there are drugs that are already on the market that could potentially be applied to take advantage of a vulnerability that target would create in the tumor. One of those targets in particular, though, is not a repurposing candidate. It is not currently druggable. There isn't a drug that exists that could go after that target. It may be a target that you've heard of. Dr. Conley mentioned it. It's called brachyury. There's a growing body of evidence to suggest that brachyury is really the key driver and potentially an Achilles heel for chordoma. And so a big focus right now and a big focus going forward is figuring out how to crack that nut, how to develop a therapy or set of therapies that can shut down brachyury, which we really think is a key driver of the disease. So I'm really encouraged and happy to say that whereas 10 years ago there were no companies whatsoever that were interested in chordoma or investing in chordoma in any way, because of the progress that's been made, because of what's been discovered about the disease, because of that research-enabling infrastructure that's been put in place, we've been able to attract the interest of over a dozen different drug companies who are now partnering with us or investing in chordoma in various ways, whether it be on actual new drug discovery, whether it be testing their drugs in mouse models of chordoma, or in partnering on clinical trials. And so whereas the Chordoma Foundation, we have, over the last 10 years, invested about $5 million in research because we've been able to bring pharmaceutical companies to the table and expand the field of chordoma research and draw in researchers that can bring their own expertise and resources to bear. We've been able to leverage, to the best of our ability to estimate, about $20 million in external research resources that have moved the field forward. This has culminated recently in a growing pipeline of clinical trials. There are now 7 clinical trials that are either ongoing or are in the process of being initiated. Some of those are here in the US, some of them are in Europe. Some of those are with drugs that are being repurposed. In other words, they're already approved for other tumor types. Some of these are drugs that are not on the market yet and would be developed for the first time to treat chordoma. So this is one of the things that just makes it so exciting for me to come to work and to be involved in this effort, because it's no longer the case that better treatments are decades away. I'm confident, I think there is a very high likelihood that better treatments for this disease are around the corner and possible within the next several years. Now, whether they're going to be curative or not, I think in all likelihood, we realize this is going to be a long-term undertaking, but certainly we think there's a great deal of promise in the therapies that are entering clinical trials, and a lot of reason to be hopeful that better therapies are possible in the next several years. As I mentioned, in addition to working to develop better treatments for the disease, we've also recognized a real need to optimize and improve the way that chordoma patients are treated and the way that medical care is provided to chordoma patients. We've worked with an international group of physicians to develop the first consensus guidelines for how chordoma ought to be treated, both in the initial setting and as well as the recurrent disease setting. And it's those guidelines that were published over the last 2 years that serve as the basis for the expert recommendations booklet that you see up on the screen. And importantly, while the research is progressing and while the faculty in the room are working to optimize the way that care is provided to patients, there is a lot that could be done to make the journey easier and better along the way. And one of the, I think the most gratifying and the best parts of the last several years at the foundation has been really focusing much more on meeting the needs of individuals affected by the disease, whether it be patients or caregivers. And we've tried to really listen and understand what the key pain points are, what the key needs are, what the challenges are people are facing. And one of the fascinating things we've learned is that caregivers, and this probably will not come as a surprise to the caregivers in the room, but caregivers report experiencing many of the same challenges that patients face, some additional challenges, but caregivers oftentimes report experiencing those challenges to an even greater degree. And I think it is very much the case that this is a disease that doesn't just affect patients, but it affects patients, their family members, an entire kind of orbit around them. And we really view the work that we do at the foundation as being about supporting everyone is impacted by chordoma. So conferences like this are an embodiment of that focus on meeting the needs of those of us who have been affected by the disease. Shannon and Megan on a daily basis are on the phone and emailing and texting and Facebooking with patients and family members across the world, providing just extraordinary support and resources. And they have, over the last couple years, provided one-on-one support, patient navigation assistance to over 1,200 individuals across the world. And to the best of our estimate, we have connected with and served about 75% of the US patient population. So this is, I think, something that I wish existed when the foundation had started 10 years ago, but very much hope that you all will take advantage of these services. And certainly if there's anything that you don't see offered, if there's something that we can do better, if there's something else that you need that we're not yet providing, we're very eager for feedback and to hear what the needs continue to be. So that's a kind of a snapshot of where we've come. Where we're going in the future, there's a lot that still needs to be done. But I think if you boil it down, our goal in the next several years, by 2020, is to have 10 promising therapies in clinical trials. And we think that that will give a very good chance of finding new effective treatments for this disease. As I mentioned, it's absolutely critical that we find therapies that can target brachyury, and you're going to hear a little bit about that from one of our collaborators here at Baylor, Dr. Charles Lin, in the research session this afternoon. There was conversation during the Ask the Expert session about the role of immune therapy. Well, as Dr. Conley said, it is early days. There is so much potential. And some of you may have heard on the news the incredible results that are being seen in melanoma and lung cancer and certain blood cancers with various types of immune therapy. And there's every reason to believe that those approaches can eventually be applied to chordoma and other solid tumors. But the challenge is there's a lot we still don't understand about how chordoma interacts with the immune system. And so there's some key questions that have to be answered to enable those promising therapies to be applied to chordoma. And then finally, there is still more that needs to be done in terms of improving and enhancing the services that we offer to the patient community, and also bringing those to more patients across the world. Whereas we've served and connected with about 75% of the US population, there is a wide world out there of individuals who don't have access to these services and information. And so we think it's really critical that we expand worldwide. So as I said, the real motivating belief behind all of this work is that chordoma is a solvable problem. It's really not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And I think, and I believe that really the key variable is who joins with us to be a part of the solution. This is a small, tight-knit community. All of the progress that you've seen described earlier is really the function of a relatively small group of people coming together to take on a big problem. And every single person who joins the effort really has an outsized impact. This is not a cause like breast cancer or more common diseases where there are hundreds of thousands or millions of families who can join the fight. This is a cause where it's really about those of us who are affected by the disease, doing what we can to work together to solve the problem. And the great thing is there are a lot of different ways that we can contribute. And I'm firmly of the belief that everyone in the Chordoma community, regardless of whether you're a patient or a caregiver or where you're located, has something to offer to this effort. And so I just wanted to touch on a few of the ways that if you're interested in getting involved or giving back or being a part of this movement, that everyone in the room can take part. So the first is very important. I think, as everyone has probably experienced, having a peer, having someone who's been there through a similar journey can be incredibly valuable. And so one of the programs that we're most excited about and proud of is our Peer Connect program, in which we match patients and family members who are going through the ordeal of Chordoma with trained peer guides who have been there and who can offer an ear to bend, a shoulder to lean on, a source of support and guidance throughout the journey. And I want to just take a moment to recognize two of our peer guides who are with us today, Susan Garbett and Chris Stahl, and maybe they could raise their hands. They're sitting together here in the front, and the service and the assistance that you provide to fellow patients and caregivers is really extraordinary. And I would say if anyone else is interested in becoming a peer guide, please speak with Susan or Chris. I know that they would be delighted to tell you what the experience is like. And likewise, feel free to speak with Shannon about getting involved. In addition to providing support on a one-on-one basis, this is an organization that's largely been built upon the volunteer efforts of quite a number of individuals in the community, whether it be volunteering at events like this, whether it be volunteering to host fundraisers, or whether it be volunteering various professional services to the Chordoma Foundation. It is all very much appreciated and very, very important. Additionally, I think it is very much the case that all of the work that I described and the efforts that need to be undertaken to continue fighting this disease require financial resources. And so, the investments that members of the Chordoma community make are really what fuel this effort. And we really do think of the donations that you make as investments, because Chordoma is a disease unlike pancreatic cancer or brain cancer, where unfortunately patients don't survive for very long. Chordoma, even though it can come back, patients fortunately can survive for quite a while. And so there is a very real possibility that progress that gets made in finding better treatments doesn't necessarily just impact patients who come in the future, but really can have an impact in the trajectory of the disease for those of us who are dealing with it now. And so we view it as our responsibility at the foundation to be a conduit for the motivations and the passions and the resources that exist within the Chordoma patient community, and to funnel those in a very strategic, thoughtful, and systematic way to advance the search for better treatments and improve the care of patients. And then finally, I'll just close by saying that much of the firepower that has propelled the Chordoma Foundation has really been driven by a cadre of community fundraisers who have hosted a wide variety of events across the world, whether it be runs, walks, bowling events, you name it. Those grassroots fundraising efforts have really fueled our efforts over the years, and it's something that people have really a lot of fun with. I think sometimes we can think of fundraising as being intimidating, but I think if you talk to people who have done these events, it really tends to be an incredibly joyous experience where the community comes and rallies around this cause that that is so important. And so we are here to assist. Bree McCormley on our team, who's sitting there in the back, maybe Bree can raise her hand. Bree is our development director and is here to be a partner with anyone who might be interested in getting involved to host a community fundraising event. And finally, I'll just say we welcome the involvement in any way of any of you in this room, and we think that this is an effort that is snowballing, and the more people who join the movement, the more momentum we will develop, and the faster we will be able to move. It has really been an honor and a pleasure to work with so many in the patient community, and has been really rewarding to see the progress that we've been able to make together. So I look forward to having the opportunity to work with many of you going forward. And please, during the breaks or during the reception this evening, please feel free to come find me or anyone on the staff. And we would love the opportunity to talk with you about getting involved.